Hi, this is Jackie Miller, your host of Out of Crazy Town. Hey, for those of you that subscribed on the last episode, thank you so much. We got a ton new subscribers. And if you haven't had a chance yet, please, please, please hit that subscribe button so we can continue to bring you amazing content and amazing guests. Thank you so much. Hi, welcome to Out of Crazy Town, your guide to divorcing a narcissist. This is your host, Jackie Miller. Today, I have back on the show Vanessa Reiser, licensed clinical social worker and expert in narcissistic abuse. She is talking about her new book, Narcissistic Abuse, a therapist's guide to identifying, escaping, and healing from toxic and manipulative people. Vanessa today talks to us about everything from how narcissists think and operate to identifying dangerous behaviors and warning signs, and also how you can create an exit strategy to safely escape from an abuser. Also listen in as Vanessa shares her view on how cults relate to narcissistic abuse, a super important topic that you cannot miss. Listen in. Hello, Vanessa Reiser. Thank you so much for coming back to Out of Crazy Town, your guide to divorcing a narcissist. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. I'm so super excited you're back because you're one of my favorite people. It's amazing how many favorite people I have now who I've never actually met in person. It's the cool thing, I guess, nowadays, right? That we get to meet so many cool people and get to know them, and we have geographical challenges. So I'm very excited you're back because we did mention your book last time you were on the show, but now it is really coming and it is in the pre-sale. And so I really want to get into it today and tell all these lucky people who are going to get to read it a little bit more about it. Is that cool?
Yeah, I'm excited. It's been about a year and a half of really hard work. I dumped everything into this thing, from empirical research to dealing with clients and followers and friends and family, and discussing all of this content with so many different people that it developed a level of mastery. And I really tried to put it all in a concise, kind of honed version that makes it kind of palatable, which one of the things that's really interesting, and I thought we would talk about today if you want to, is that concept of cult abuse and how it's so connected to narcissistic abuse. And that's what the book aims to do.
I love it. We have never broached that subject on this podcast. I think it's super important. I've heard other mental health professionals sort of, whispers of it here and there, but I would really love to get into that. That would be awesome. And just to remind everyone who you are, Vanessa Reiser, a licensed clinical social worker, and you are the founder of teletherapist.org, which you guys should go there. Amazing information. And it's so awesome that you have founded that. So now not only do you have your private practice because you specialize in narcissistic abuse, but you also, have the specialty where you understand the cult aspect of it as well, which you just alluded to. And now you are an author, which I am so super excited about. The book is called Narcissistic Abuse, a therapist's guide to identifying, escaping, and healing from toxic and manipulative people. Just so you guys know right now, if you want to go to Amazon, it is on order and will be available October 29th. Is that right? Okay. And actually, I'm just going to get this out of the way too, although people just listen before you get on your phones and scroll. If you do go to Instagram, we'll remind you again at the end. And then also in my show notes at Vanessa Reiser, LCSW is her link tree, and it'll take you $1 stuff. So I just want to get that out of the way up front. So would you mind, Vanessa? I know I read like in one of your bios, which I didn't really know about you before, and we didn't talk about it last time, was your history with trauma, and that you were in a situation growing up that you woke up some days and there was no food and no heat. And yeah. I didn't know that you had that in your past. How do you feel like that translates into what happened later in life?
That was tricky. I mean, my parents were kind of like a little hippie-ish. And so we kind of had like this barefoot, kind of when I was very young. We didn't have a lot of resources. And so I think in a lot of ways, it was very hard to come out of that with some trauma. And yet my parents were not really present. And what I think the gift that came out of it was this sort of like radical independent thinker that I became, because nobody was really there to groom me. So I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. And I think ultimately it ends up today being quite the gift. It was not so in terms of falling into the web of a narcissist, because I didn't know that people like this existed. It would have been probably a good thing to learn. Being an independent thinker translated into me being kind of keen on getting enveloped in some of those kind of cult experiences. I think it made it so like when I was seeing the narcissist behavior, I was like, this is not good. It wasn't like, well, falling in line in terms of patriarchy or religion, or I was like, no, I'm going to get out of here. Something is wrong here.
That's good to hear. And it's so interesting to hear you kind of talk about, I guess, silver lining or mindset shift, because I think that's part of the healing, right? I mean, we can't change the past. And so that's really interesting that you say that. And it does lead well into sort of the cult topic as well. Because it's also important to acknowledge that we have different kinds of trauma. Like, you maybe things were unpredictable for you as a child and your parents were just sort of hippie-ish and that was their that was their thing. Like my mom passed when I was young and my dad was completely out to lunch and we were just sort of abandoned as well. And no one was being vicious or like things like that. But there's serious child traumas there, but that do end up leading, down a different path when you grow up. Let's get into the cult stuff. What do you want to say about that in relation to this topic?
Yeah, so I think it feels radical to talk about that for some reason with people that are still so busy trying to process domestic violence and psychological abuse as being a trauma. So this sort of like taking it to the next level and for them to have identified or identifying that they were in fact in a cult of one or a cult of two or a cult of three or four or five in terms of family system feels like there's shame attached to that word and concept. But it's also, I think, really validating to understand that mind control is real and it can happen to anyone. And so the book really does aim to fuse those concepts. And there aren't a lot of books written about just that. And it's, I think, really important for people to understand that, not just for the victims, but for the public at large to be less judgmental around what happens, because we see people now coming out of cults that are particularly intelligent, particularly special, well off, and have all of these things going for them, and somehow just get roped into this scenario. And I think that's really a really important thing to identify, is that it can happen to anyone.
It can happen to anyone. And it just speaks to the level of cunning and manipulation that these individuals are capable of. I mean, we've all seen the documentaries of the cults and whatnot. And how do you get anywhere from dozens to hundreds to thousands of people to follow you and do not healthy things? I mean, it's because these people have unbelievable power in their manipulation. And you're right, there's so much shame tied to it when you get connected to one of these people and how did I do it? But it is not you. They are freaking good. And it is scary how good they are.
Yeah. And I think that's what people really need to understand, not just, like I said, the victims, but friends of, that these are people that are being mind controlled, that are being heavily manipulated. And the lies, it's hard for people to process that people are like evil or have absolutely no empathy whatsoever. Most people think that other people think the same way they think. So they have a really hard time, and they're like kind of thinking like, well, I would never fall into a cult, or, I would never this, or I would never that, but you just don't know. Very slow. It's insidious and it sort of seeps in, and you might believe the lies someone tells you, because if you're not thinking like a psychopath, how would you ever be able to have that understanding? And most of us don't develop those skills from an early age the way that the narcissist does, or the sociopath does, or the psychopath does, which is to become a master manipulator very early on. And it works. Their skill sets really work. We see this in political climates where you can manipulate millions of people. We saw this in Nazi Germany. We saw it in cults like Jonestown and others, where really, really wonderful people who were dedicated to a cause and wanted to do good things were roped into this web of disaster. And so it's happening all the time, all around. People come into my practice all the time, and they are extricating themselves from the most random of cults, like Midwest. In New York, we had the Nexium cult right in Albany. We had the Stolen Youth cult, which was at Sarah Lawrence College. And they're recent. I mean, it sounds like when you hear about a cult that it's like, maybe this is some faraway land, but it's happening right near you in maybe a cult system or a family system or a domestic violence scenario where there's a master manipulator. And so I think people really understanding that narcissistic abuse is cult abuse. It's just a matter of, understanding that, I think, is really important. And that's part of like my cause, is to really kind of put that kind of language out there, even though it feels radical and strange for some people to understand.
Absolutely. And something just dawned on me when we talk about how slow and insidious, and that is how they get so many intelligent, intuitive people wrapped in their web, is they're almost able to match your energy at first. And I think that's where it gets so tricky, because you do have really intuitive people and they're like, no, I met this person, they're so nice. No, they're gentle, they're kind, they're all these things. And that is where the chameleon is so mind blowing, because you can't even detect their energy yet. They've actually been able to mask it and mirror you in a way that sucks you in. And you're like, no, none of my, whistles or red flags are going off, in the very beginning. And then it changes over time. And then I know, what I'm talking about later on. Oh, the energy. I always say, like, you could get cancer standing next to one of these people. Once the mask, and it's almost like an energy mask, it comes off, then, but they are able to mirror you and mirror those around you. They can't hold on for very long, right? At least not forever, but they do it first. And that's what sucks people in. And it's hard to see.
Yeah. And they kind of run the gamut in terms of how they present. We see the more covert version of this, which is like Keith Raniere from the Nexium cult, where he's sort of this unassuming character, and he doesn't look like a psychopath. He looks like, the guy next door, just a regular dude, not particularly like scary looking, or he's not like somebody who you would imagine to be hazardous. So we see that version, and then you see like sort of the quintessential kind of jerk, like in the Ferrari, who's sort of like, peacocking around. You see more overt, obvious style, but they come in different shapes and sizes.
And one thing I know that I've read about your book is that you do use a lot of personal examples, which I love. It helps really solidify a point, and that you're trying to make. And then it's so validating to read that other people went through it. So I'm so glad you use so many examples in your book. I like it. Do you have one that you can share with us?
I do remember in hindsight discovering that I was being stalked. Like it was something that was, kind of happening in the onset, the early parts, like sort of this luring phase.
Okay.
I remember understanding and processing later that he was following my social media accounts and had developed an understanding that I had gotten divorced. They'll sort of swoop in on different supplies that they know are maybe in a vulnerable state or have gone through a death or a divorce or some other vulnerability, and they will kind of swoop in and, here comes Prince Charming to save the day.
That's so interesting that you used stalking before, because it is a form of stalking. And I always talk about it in post-separation abuse. But you're right. And I was going to bring this up earlier. It's the same thing, the information gathering they're doing. Mm-hmm. And it is a true predatory behavior. They're predators. I mean, and again, I think back to your point, like, it's so hard to really comprehend that somebody is that evil. They plan it, they look for it, they look for behaviors. In my situation, I always say I was a great target because I had moved to 2.5 states away from my family, had a brand new job. So I didn't really even have a work system. I made a couple of buddies, no family. I mean, I was like prime target. I had no support system. To your point, coming off a divorce, my point, look, easy to isolate, all things that they look for when they're looking for a victim.
And they basically will throw out a bunch of lines, almost like a fisherman. They'll cast a bunch of lines. And if your boundaries are not there and don't understand what this is, then you are vulnerable to getting kind of reeled in. So I don't think that they have a type. And I think there's a rotation of sorts. They kind of have a bunch of different supplies that they're kind of always working on and managing in terms of who's on the back burner, who's, in the front right now. But they are always working those angles and always laying groundwork to reel somebody new into this scenario. And yeah, if you're particularly alone, you are maybe dealing with a recent breakup or a wound, whether it's a job loss or a career change of something like this, any vulnerabilities, they are, sniffing that out and they're going to exploit them. And I think it makes people, understand better that that is something that is really, there's forethought to that. There's a maniacal kind of deviance agenda that's gone on behind the scenes before they even find you. They're kind of stalking their prey, to your point.
The other thing they're so good at is carrying on so many other facets of their life that you don't know about. And I know I read that in another, version of your bio as well, that after your breakup or escape, I should say, you discovered a bunch of just bad behavior that was going on that you were not even aware of. And I had the same situation. And so isn't it just, it's amazing what they're able to, all the plates they keep spinning. And you're the one that taught me on the last episode we were on too about how they have cast out all these lines, and they're always, it's like working a whole bunch of deals at one time, and they're all in various stages, and who can they hook next and what supply can they have on the line next. And so, I mean, were you just in shock at some of the things you found out?
I really was. And it was funny because having developed such a tight relationship with the other exes, they similarly were shocked. And these are people that were with him for many, many years. I was not. But that kind of information, to see somebody having a double life, was hard to believe because they're so kind of far up your ass that you're like, how could this person find the time? And so it's astonishing. We saw that in the Netflix show, I think it was Netflix, Bad Surgeon, where he had like this whole entire other family, and Tinder Swindler, where he's sort of like, just moving on to the next and has all of these lives happening at the same time. So there's no connection or sentimentality that they possess, so they don't feel engaged or really interested in those bonds. And so it's easy for them to kind of flit about and move from one to the next to the next. It's inconsequential. It's like how you might, use an appliance or a pair of sunglasses. It's like toss, see you later, next. They don't really feel connected to things or people of any kind. I mean, these are people that will abandon businesses, abandon homes, abandon things that you or I might consider to be an emotional connection to, like a home or baby pictures or something. These are people that would just discard. Means nothing at all.
That is such a good point. And I've never had anyone bring up that example before, because yes, even though they're things, something like your home is very emotional, and no, they don't have connections to those either. That is so, I've never heard that before. And yes, that is so true.
Yeah, they bounce from just one dwelling or one geographical region, and they just shapeshift. And all of a sudden you'll see a different version of the chameleon in a different location with a different vibe, mirroring someone else and sort of, making them believe all of the things. And then when that gets exhausted, they will reinvent themselves. And they're slippery, they're sneaky. They can do this, and they do it behind LLCs, and, they hide all of the businesses and kind of manage to get away with it. The stuff that they do works. It works fairly well. Generally speaking, it is not sustainable long term. These things will ultimately catch up with them. And especially if there are overlaps with sociopathy, because now you're looking at like high level criminality that they'll engage in. So and sometimes when they kind of get away with stuff, they try to push the envelope a little bit. Maybe let's see what else I can get away with. And they kind of get a little, and ultimately could piss off the wrong person. These are people that are heavy into drug use, so they could overdose, have a stroke, get a venereal disease from all of the sex. And so they kind of don't have a really long shelf life, but it does work for a good amount of years. I suppose it does work. I think what's happening too, and Dr. Nadine Macaluso said this to me recently. She was the former wife of the Wolf of Wall Street, and she specializes in this as well. But she said this is a dying breed. She said to me, she thinks that they're being exposed in terms of social media and all of the work that we are all doing, talking about it and exposing some of the behaviors that many victims had to deal with and suffer in silence, for so long. And so I think they're having maybe to change the game or behave differently because they're, now being seen for what they are, which is interesting. I guess we'll see what they do with that information. How do they now shift again?
And I hope so for the case of our children, right? Right. And I just had on the CEO of One Love, the organization that teaches youth about unhealthy relationships, which I'm so excited that organization exists. But yes, I hope so. We'll have to see though, because like you said, they are such good shapeshifters and good manipulators. My worry is they're going to morph into another thing that we have to figure out. But I love Dr. Nadine. She's been on this podcast as well. And so
She's the best. I love her so much. She's
the best. The best. We have so many amazing women in this community. I'm just so honored to be a part of it. So I couldn't agree with you more. One thing that you mentioned in terms of like something that women go through this narcissistic abuse, it's something I'm obsessed with too, Vanessa. And you say that so many of victims of narcissistic abuse say they feel they cannot get past the injustice of their abusers not being held accountable for their actions and the trauma they've caused, while also moving on to abuse time and time again. What do you want to say on that topic to women? Because I'll tell you from a coaching perspective, and I love that we have two different perspectives going here. So go ahead.
I think this is the hardest part for every single one of my clients. My clients deal with losing custody of their children to an abusive monster. My clients deal with going to jail. They deal with getting sentenced because of the lies that are being told and the loss of career and getting bankrupt. And so the trauma is so next level, and having to do that without much support from attorneys and judges and domestic violence centers and the public at large. And so that is the worst part, is the injustice. And I've spoken to Dr. Ramani about this, and there are books written about it, but that is a really, really, really hard pill to swallow, because it's almost like you have to radically accept that the judicial system will fail you, specifically with the family courts. And that's hard because those systems are supposed to be there to protect you. So you feel like traumatized when you enter those environments. And so I don't have a sort of a solve or a remedy or a fix to that until we can get into a space where the people who are in positions of power are less narcissistic, which is really hard because they generally do well. There's 1 in 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly. That's the data. So they climb the corporate ladder and they're sitting on benches as judges and they are attorneys. And so they don't give a shit. So it's not that they don't get it. They either don't get it, don't care, or both. I mean, it's like, so it's really sort of a recipe for pain for so many people. And so until those systems shift, I don't know if it's through legislation, we are probably going to have to just kind of, lock arms and manage the trauma until that occurs. It's really a big mountain to climb, though.
It is. And one really pivotal word there about the radical acceptance, it's something I talk about a lot, but it's to kind of paraphrase what Tina Swithin says, it's you can't move forward until you acknowledge where you're standing right now. So it doesn't mean it's fair, doesn't mean you like it, doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean it's okay. It's not okay. But we have to acknowledge where we're standing. So now we can make a plan. And so, yeah, the radical acceptance part. And somebody also said the other day, it's not a justice system, it's a legal system. And these judges don't care because they're like, what do you want me to do about it? Next, I've got 52 cases on my docket in one day. What do you want me to do about it? Next. So I am obsessed as well with, where do you find your power when you're left in this position with a system that won't help you? And, this unbelievable, mind-blowing things that this person who has victimized you has gotten away with. And wherever I found myself as a coach is, I'm getting pissed off, God damn it, that these guys, or mostly guys, but also women, these narcissistic abusers are stealing minutes from our lives as we sit here swirling in how this is not fair. So that's where I come in also from a coaching perspective. And I'm like, let's figure out how to move forward. That's why it's so cool to have you as a therapist, supporting these women, and me as a coach, look from a little different perspective. You have to have a lot of support, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think it's important for you to really spend your time with people that get it. I don't really vibe too much with people who don't get it anymore. Those days are behind me. I just feel safer in those environments. And it's a good, cast of characters, the people, as you mentioned, in this space, and the friends that I have that understand it are, just the best kinds of people. They have endured trauma, or they are just careful about listening and holding space for something like this, because it sounds so unbelievable. It's very hard for people to believe a lot of what goes on behind closed doors, particularly if the narcissist is got that superficial charm. But I think that that's, important, is to surround yourself with a good support system, because if you go into the courtroom as I did, I did not co-parent with a narcissist. I did not fortunately have a child with a narcissist. And so the closest I ever got was recently when I was in court, and it was, in the press quite a bit. The judge eviscerated me. It was the equivalent of going into court and telling the judge that you were raped and having the judge be like, well, why did you wear that, you whore? I mean, it was that equivalent. That's what it feels like to go through that. And I think I needed to do that, actually. I think the universe was like, you know what, we're going to put you in this courtroom so you could see what your clients go through. And it blew me away. It blew me away. I remember just being paralyzed over the thought that she was going to not just not give me the restraining order that I absolutely deserved, because there were 2 fake clients put in my practice, and it's all been all over the press. Not only did I not get it, she just went over and above, call me names. And it was really astonishing. And so I think I say all of this to say to people who are listening that while I didn't have to co-parent with one, I understand how bad that judicial system is, as much as I can, right? So as an advocate, somebody who went to school for a very macro master's degree in community organizing and policy, I do advocacy work through my runs and stuff. So not only am I a clinician, but I'm really attached to this sort of macro patriarchal problem that we have in the judicial system. And I saw it firsthand. It is no joke. Well, if I were in that environment and I lost custody of precious children, I would lose my mind. And so when my clients come into me and they can barely form a sentence and they're totally decompensating, they're like warriors. I don't know how I would do it, if I'm being honest. I think I would probably have taken my son and just moved to Colombia.
And you see how those things happen. And I had a couple of guests on. I know Annie Kinney's one of them, but we talked about when the court system is forcing you to hand your children over to an abusive parent and your kid's looking at you like, protect me. I cannot imagine a more gut-wrenching situation when you're being forced to betray your child and they're just looking at you as the safe parent, like, please help me. And you can't. And as you walk them over and say, go with the other parent, anyway, it just blows my mind. It actually keeps me up at night and makes me nauseous at the same time. But so thank you. And to all the listeners out there, just acknowledging what versions of this you are all going through, because it's so hard. And so I am glad that there's more of us rising up, and hopefully Dr. Nadine Macaluso's right. And we're making some headway, at least in exposing these guys. To dig down a little deeper and more specific, and especially as it relates to your book, you mentioned that the readers will learn how to identify dangerous behaviors and signs of narcissistic abuse. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So the warning signs?
Yeah, sure. I'll read it alphabetically because I have the list here. Okay, so the narcissist is always an addict. It's not that all addicts are narcissists. All narcissists are addicts because they are addicted to and they get from attention. So they are always addicts. And then we have, other addictions like sex, money, drugs, alcohol, gambling, shopping, food, video games, etc. But they are always addicts, period, hard stop, because they are addicted to attention. They don't feel much of anything, so they are going to impulsively create chaos just to get that reaction. They need to have that. They are generally anxious or fast moving, boundaryless, to be braggarts. So these are people who are kind of boasting quite a bit. They are cheaters. They control. They deflect. They tend to be entitled. So they might cut lines, drive fast, or one up others. They future fake. They are fantastical thinkers. So there's always a story, you're my soulmate and all of this shit. They gaslight, which can just include circular conversations. They are impulsive, insecure, intimidating, isolating, love bombing, lying, manipulative. They wear a mask in public and they are different behind the scenes. They mirror people. They have no empathy. So this is ground zero for the narcissist. The narcissist is indifferent to your pain. The sociopath enjoys your pain. So the narcissist is like they would step over the dead body, but the sociopath put the dead body there. They are passive aggressive. They project. They use the silent treatment a lot. They use smear campaigns. So this is something where they're kind of planting seeds all the while for the discard around things that are negative about you. Maybe you're not a good cook. Maybe they're going to say, oh, mommy seemed a little off today. Is she okay? They sort of plant these seeds early on so that they can later call you crazy, etc. They are superficial, they triangulate, and they withhold. So those are kind of all of the things that they do. And there are different, as I mentioned, variations of this. And there are certainly overlaps too with sociopathy and psychopathy. So there can be even some bipolar things that come up, or borderline, or histrionic, even obsessive OCD behaviors. People will even sometimes ask if their abuser is on the spectrum because there's an affect. There's a lot of overlap that happens, but those are generally specific to their sort of playbook.
Oh my gosh, that alphabet was amazing. And there are so many words that you didn't even have to do a stretch to get there. They're just, that is so awesome. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. So good. So good. And one last thing I want to talk about, because you mentioned that readers will learn this in your book, and we don't have to get too into this, but I'd love to touch on it, and it's exit strategies, because if you're listening to this, and I know this is a Divorcing a Narcissist podcast, but so many other people listen to it and you're just trying to leave a relationship, what are some things you can touch on with regards to that?
So, developing that support system is going to be key. This is really hard to do by yourself. I think it's getting increasingly easier for us to share our stories. So to the extent that you can kind of let your inner circle know what's going on to protect yourself. I often tell people to make a video of themselves saying that they are a good swimmer, that they know how to drive a stick shift, that they're not suicidal or they're not on drugs, so that, God forbid, a narcissist tries to do, because the post-separation abuse is particularly treacherous and dangerous when you actually do try to get away. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is where the real abuse starts. Hiding things, hiding your cherished possessions, maybe in a storage unit, something inexpensive, or at a friend's house, garage, even start to tuck things quietly, because they are ruthless fighters in a divorce specifically. They will, urinate, defecate, and just harm all of the things you care about. They have been studying for a long time. So if it's grandma's rosary beads, they're going to get ripped apart and they're going to be bouncing off the kitchen tile. So get ready for the most egregious things you could ever imagine somebody doing. It's going to happen. So make it a point. There's a little whisper that's telling you, hide the pictures, hide the bags, hide the Rolex, hide the money. There's a reason for that. Do that. Whatever that little whisper is telling you to do, hide yo shit, because this fool is going to come for you like you've never seen. And it's okay. I'm a little bit different therapist. It's a little bit rogue, but this is the real deal. You have to start stashing cash. When you go to the grocery store, extend that credit card, $20 every time, stick it somewhere. Whatever you can do and manage, start to think differently. Get your attorney who is narc savvy, somebody who maybe is even narcissistic themselves, because they need to be a good fighter. And they have to be in bed with the judge. This is all political. You have to understand that you have to be smoking cigars and playing golf with the judge, period. It's corrupt. It's the way it is. So there's a lot of things that you have to do. And it's kind of like big girl panties time, because this is really serious stuff, because they know how to play this game. So you have to learn how to play the game. You cannot be neutral on a moving train when it comes to this. They are not going to mediate. They would rather cut their arm off than write you a check for child support. So it's a trickery of sorts. It's a game. It's chaos. You're not alone. You can do it, and it gets better, but it's hard.
You can do it and it gets better. I completely agree. So thank you for that. That's a perfect note to end on too. So unless there's anything else you want to tell us, I'm just super excited again that this book's coming out. And if you guys don't really know how all this works, because I've had a few people on that are pre-selling books, please go to Amazon or wherever your booksellers are. Maybe you can mention a few other if you want. Pre-order this book. It helps so much. And we want to support intelligent, amazing, talented, experienced people like Vanessa who are putting content out there to help all of us. So whether you go to Amazon, again, I'll have all the links in the show notes, but Vanessa M. Reiser, LCSW, Narcissistic Abuse, a therapist's guide to identifying, escaping, and healing from toxic and manipulative people. You need to read it. October 29th.
Yes, thank you so much. Hachette is the publishing company, so you can find it at Hachette's website as well. I'm super proud of it. I hope you guys like it. And as I mentioned, the cult piece, I think, really is that difference. It's really an interesting perspective when I put it all together, how that worked. I think it's an interesting way to manage, kind of making yourself understand that you're not alone, that this is happening and all around you in different areas, different family systems too. So it's not just the cult that we always thought what a cult looked like, but there are families that are particularly toxic. And so highlighting that, I think, adds a little bit more value to what is a really important space already. But this piece, I think you'll find, is interesting and different.
I'm so glad you've added this perspective, because I have like a blog post that says, did you marry into a narcissistic family? And I, again, never made that connection, but that's exactly what it was. They had a cult going, and, in many family, you'll find out many family members of your narcissistic ex or abuser are. And I think also it's such another piece of validation, because like you said, we can watch all these documentaries on cults, and there's some pretty famous ones out there. And then when you realize, oh, that's exactly what happened to me, maybe alleviates the shame a little bit, right? Like, because you're like, how did this happen? How did I let this happen? How did I ignore it? How did? And so I love drawing out that comparison. It makes so much sense, Vanessa. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
All right. Well, you're always welcome back here. Good luck with the book. Super excited about it. And we will talk soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right.